Hello, in this video I'm going to take you through the OCR J277 GCSE Computer Science Unit 1 Computer Systems paper. This is the sample paper. You have 1.5 hours to finish it and you are not allowed a calculator. Question 1. The specifications of two CPUs is shown in figure 1. And we've got the details here for computer 1 and computer 2. When running the 3D simulator, computer 1 is likely to run faster than computer 2. Using the information in figure 1, identify one reason for this. So let's compare the tables. So computer 1 is what we're saying is going to be faster. If we compare the clock speed, computer 1's is 1 and computer 2's is 1.4. So the clock speed on this one is slower, so it can't be this one. Cache size on here is 2. It's 2 on this one. And this one has 4 cores, whereas the other one only has 2. So it has to be the number of cores, so because it's got more. So we'll say because it has more cores. And just to give some understanding, one way to think about it is that you've got 4 cores, so that's almost like having 4 processors, each working at 1 gigahertz each, which means that in theory, this computer could work at 4 gigahertz, whereas this second one, it's 1.4 and it's got 2 cores, so that one would only be technically working at 2.8. It's not quite that black and white, but that's one way to think about it. Part B. Identify 2 other parts of the computer that are not in figure 1 which could improve performance of the computers. Okay, so basically is what could improve the computer. So the thing that we're always talking about is the RAM, because the more RAM you've got, the more programs you can open. We could also talk about, you could have another processor, and that always takes the form of a GPU, a graphics processing unit. It's a 2-mark question, and we've got two answers. And it's only asking for 2. One that you could also mention would be using an SSD. I'm just going to add this on because it's different types of hard drives and SSDs are faster, so that's one option. Part C. Explain one reason why cache size affects the performance of the CPU. So why does cache size affect the performance of the CPU? It says one reason, but it's actually 2 marks, so that means that we need to expand on it. So the whole idea of cache is that it stores frequently used instructions so that they don't need to be fetched and decoded over and over again. And so let's start off by explaining that. So we could say cache stores frequently used instructions so that they do not need to be fetched and decoded over. Okay, and the whole benefit of this, okay, because I don't think you'd necessarily get a mark for that point I put there, but the main benefit of this is that it decreases transfer time. Making the PC fast, the CPU faster. Okay, and you could also say and more efficient. Okay, good. Okay, part D. Identify 2 events that take place during the fetch execute cycle. So let's think of it. So first of all, instructions are fetched from the RAM. Okay. Second part of that is once they're fetched, they are decoded into binary. You could then, you only need 2 and it's 2 marks. You could also talk about the fact that they are then executed, the instructions are ran, and then it repeats the cycle again. Question 2. Nina wants to transfer photos from a digital camera to an external secondary storage device. Define what is meant by secondary storage. So this is secondary storage we're going through, so that means it's referring to section, I think it's 1.2.2 in the spec. So secondary storage, just one of those terms you need to memorize. It's long-term storage. So that's talking about your hard drives, your USBs, things where you store any work long-term that you'll need to come back to. You could mention the fact that it's volatile. Maybe I should actually mention what of, so I could say of files. Okay. Identify 3 common types of storage Nina can choose from. So this is just a standard 3. So you've got magnetic, and that's like your old school standard hard drives. You've got optical, and then you've got solid state. What you don't want to do is you don't want to write things like USBs, CDs, because they are your storage devices. Okay. State 4 characteristics of secondary storage. So they would be things like capacity, how big it is. You could mention the speed. You could mention portability, and mention cost, because it always comes down to that basically. These 2 answers, B and C, they are directly written in the spec. Part A you might need to look a bit harder for to find that kind of information, but again, revising the spec is going to give you all the information you need. Question 3. A satellite navigation system, SatNav, uses RAM and ROM. Tick one box in each row to show whether each of the statements is true for RAM or ROM in the SatNav. So let's just quickly remind ourselves what RAM and ROM are. So RAM is volatile memory, which is used to store instructions for programs that are currently open, such as the operating system. ROM is non-volatile, and it will store information such as firmware and boot up instructions for the when the computer starts. So here we go. Stores the boot up sequence for the SatNav. Okay, like we just said, that's going to be ROM. I'm going to put an X in instead of a tick. The contents are lost when the SatNav is turned off. If it's lost, that means it is volatile, which is RAM. Holds copies of maps, of open maps and routes. So because it's open, it's going to be RAM again, because like we said, it stores instructions for programs that are currently open. The SatNav contains an embedded system. Contains an embedded system. Define what an embedded system is. So an embedded system is a computer system that's built into another device. Okay, and then it's asking to identify 3 devices other than a SatNav which contain embedded systems. So an example could be a washing machine. So basically it's anything that's computerized, but you wouldn't really think of it as something that's computed. Like a computer, so you could say MP3 player or a dishwasher. Question 4. A computer records an audio file of someone playing guitar. Describe what happens when the computer converts the music into a file. So that's quite straightforward. So we can say, first of all, the music is sampled, and then we want to explain what that is. That's where the height of the wavelength is measured and stored as binary data. And that's your basic definition of sampling. The sample rate is increased on the computer when recording the guitar. Give 2 effects this will have on the recording. So if the sample rate is increased, then you're taking more samples, which means there's more data taken in, or is stored, we could say, making the file size bigger, because the more data you've got, the bigger the file size. Another thing is that the quality will increase. So let's say more data is stored, increasing the quality. Okay, so as you're taking more data, the quality is increased. Question 5, convert the binary number 11001011 into denary. So what we'll do for that is we'll draw that table that I normally go through with people. So we'll do 128 because that's going to be the highest bit. And then we go 64, 32, 16, 8, 4, 2, 1. Then if we write the number out, we've got a 1 here, got a 1 here, 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, 1. Then what we do is let's add together the ones which have 1, so it'll be 128, 64, 8, 2, and 1. And if we add all of those together, so we've got 128, let's write that out actually, 128 plus 64 plus 8 plus 2 plus 1, that will equals 203. So our answer is 203. Complete a 2-place shift to the right on the binary number, and then we've got the same binary number. So when we shift something to the right, all that we do is, if you imagine there was like it's a bit like timesing by 10. So if you think about it, we've got 1 1 0 0 1 0 1 1, and if we shift it 2 places to the right, it's like going 1 shift, 2 shifts, and each time you shift it, you put a 0 on. So you do a shift and add a 0, shift, add another 0 at the beginning. Therefore, this would be our final answer. However, when you do that shift, what we need to also do is we need to take the ones off the end. So we shifted it 2 spaces to the right, but we still want it to be an 8-bit number. So we're going to let these 2 fall off the edge. So we've added 2 on, we've shifted it 2 spaces to the right. So we've added 2 zeros at the beginning. Now we need to take the 2 off at the end. Explain the effect of performing a 2-place shift to the right on the binary number, and then we've got this number here. So is it the exact same number? 1 1 0 0 1 0. Yeah, so we've got the exact same number. So we know that originally it was 203. Let's just write this in the side. So it was 203 originally. Let's see what it is now. So we've got a 2 plus, so we've got 1 2 4 8 16 and 32. So if we add them all together, is we've got 18 plus 32, which is going to give us 40, 50. So basically, when you shift the number, so we've gone from 203 down to 50. When you shift the number to the right, what happens is it actually divides by 2. And when you shift it to the left, it doubles. So it's just halving and doubles. So we just need to explain that. So we can also say each time you shift it, it divides by 2. So this number is divided by 4. Okay. Now, this is a 2-mark question. I don't think I've really covered enough on this. So we want to go into a bit more detail. So what I would say, actually, we've gone from 203 down to 50, not quite divided by 4. So we could say it can lose accuracy as well. Okay, and there we are. Question 6. The table gives the ASCII code for the characters, and then we've got the ASCII codes for L, M, N, O, and P. Explain how the word mop will be represented in ASCII. Okay, so what we need to explain first of all is that an ASCII code will be stored to represent each character. And you could also say they'll be stored in the correct order, in the order that they're written. Okay, so that's I think that's enough for 1 point. But what you want to do is a 2 point. We could also give an example. Okay, so mop. So we could say, for example, mop. So that will be M is 77. O would be 79. And P would be 80. There we go. Question 7. The owners of a large bakery have a local area network, LAN, with a star topology. They order their supplies over the internet. When data is transmitted from the bakery to the supplier, network protocols are used. Define what is meant by a network protocol. So this is one of those terms, it's a term that you need to define. You just literally need to memorize it. So I would say rules for sending data over a network. Okay. Part B, TCP/IP is a set of protocols based on layers. With regards to network protocols, define what is meant by a layer. Okay. Again, it's asking you to define something. So all you need to do is you need to just memorize the term, division of network functionality. Part 2, describe one advantage of using layers to construct network protocols. So what is an advantage of using layers? So the first thing you can talk about is the fact, well, it's just one. So we can talk about the fact that each layer is separate, they're self-contained, meaning that one layer doesn't interfere with the other. Okay, so we can say the application layer does not interfere with the, say, data layer. Okay, and let's take it a bit more detail. It's only asked for one advantage, but it's a 2-mark question. So we need to go into give some kind of evaluation on that. So we could talk about the fact, so therefore, if you were a developer, you could develop something for one layer without affecting the others. Part C, give 2 reasons why the bakery may use a star network topology for their LAN. So basically what we're after here are the advantages of using star. So remember, a star is the one where you've got a central node or a switch or a server in the center, and all of the others connect to it. So the main benefit of that is that if one device goes down, the network keeps running. Another advantage of the star network is that when data is being sent, because there's basically only one path for each device, it means that you get far fewer collisions of data, because data collides less. Okay. Question 8. A hospital stores patients' details on its computer network. The hospital is concerned about the security of its patients' details. Staff already use strong passwords to protect systems. Explain, with reference to system security, 3 other ways that the hospital could protect the network. So we need to basically find 3 ways to protect the network, and it's said with reference to system security, so it's going to be what was written in that area of the spec. So one that people always go for is anti-malware. the second one that people generally choose are firewalls. And we could do for a third, we've spent a lot of time, we've gone over a whole topic on encryption. Okay, now it says to explain, so we have to actually explain what these things do. So let's start by explaining about what anti-malware does. So we can talk about the fact that it just removes viruses from a computer. Or let's say, instead of saying viruses, we could say malicious software such as viruses. Okay, so I've said computer there, but it could always be a network. Moving on, we've got firewalls next. So firewalls, they block unauthorized access. And then our last one is encryption, and we could say that it scrambles the data so that if there's any unauthorized access, it's not understood. Okay, moving on, part B, identify 3 errors that the hospital staff could make that may endanger the security of the network. Outline a procedure that could be put in place to prevent each error. So what we need for this one is we need to find 3 errors. So it's 3 things that could go wrong in the network to put the data at risk. So actually this isn't something that you'd have been explicitly taught. It's not something that comes in. So we need to think what could put a network at risk. So a lot of organizations will block USBs. So that's because someone could bring in a dangerous file accidentally or deliberately. Okay, we've got that one. Another thing could be downloads, isn't it? So you could be downloading a virus or something that's infected. And for a third one, we could talk about somebody physically damaging the network. Okay, so put an example there to make it a bit clearer. Right, so the procedures now. How do we stop someone bringing in a dangerous file? Well, we could prevent different mediums being working. So not such as USBs. And let's go, so that could sound like a policy. We could just be saying, you're not allowed to do this. Let's make it a bit clearer that we're saying actually disabling it. So blocked. Okay, downloading a virus or infected file. So we could block certain websites. Or even only allow whitelisted websites. Okay, and finally, people physically damaging the network. It could be having some kind of physical security, such as locks to stop people accessing rooms stop certain people accessing rooms, such as server rooms. There we go. Question 9. A restaurant has a computer-based ordering system which is running really slowly. A technician has said the hard disk drive is fragmented. The technician has suggested using utility software to defragment the drive. Explain how the restaurant's hard disk could have become fragmented. So that's the question on fragmentation. So all we need to say is how it would have become fragmented. So that's all about you ending up with gaps in the hard drive. Well, you need to explain how that would happen. So presumably it's because orders go on and they go off, and that would leave a gap there. So we need to explain that. So we can start off by saying that orders will get saved on, and then once they've been processed, they're deleted. So orders be saved to the hard disk and then deleted once they have been processed. Okay, then we want to talk about the fact that if that's happened, when a new order comes in, a new file is made, and it might be too big for the gap that's been left. So for example, if you just deleted a small order, then you want to fill that gap with a new order which is bigger. It won't fit. So when a new order is made, it may be too big to fit the space left by the previous order. Okay, so we've explained that. Then what we're going to move on to is we can explain the fact that the orders then has to be broken up, and that's going to mean that you've got part of an order in one place and in another. To place the order, it may need to be split up, meaning it's physically in multiple places. Okay, explain how defragmentation software could overcome the issues of the slow computer system. So this is how does it work? So how do we reverse that problem? So first of all, we need to explain that it works by physically moving files. Okay, what happens is it puts all of the files together in and it makes them contiguous, which basically means continuous. Okay, and we can say then all the files are together, then all the free spaces together. And this is a bit like tidying up your room. So then once it's tidied, or once it's organized, it means that you need to make fewer disk accesses to find your file because it's all in the right place. So because all of the files are together, fewer disk accesses are needed to access a file. And we're done. Question 10. A law company currently uses a local area network, LAN, linked to a wide area network, WAN. They want to upgrade their system to utilize cloud storage. Define what is meant by a wide area network. So that's quite a straightforward term. It's a define, so it's just one of those terms you need to know. So it's a network that covers a large geographical area. Part B, explain 2 advantages to the law company of storing their data in the cloud. So the first one is that it can be accessed from any device with an internet connection. Okay, And what we need to do, if we see that's a 4-mark question, so that, and there's only 2 points, so we need to kind of explain them. So let's add some evaluation so we can explain that that means the lawyers can work from home or out of the country. Okay, good. Another point is we could talk about the fact that with cloud storage you can easily extend your storage. Okay. And this means that they'll be able to take on more cases because they can store more data. Okay. Part C explain 2 disadvantages to the law company of storing their data. And if we look again, we need to do 2 disadvantages. It's a 4-mark question, so that means we need to explain them. So we could say you need a constant internet connection. If you do not have an internet connection, the lawyers cannot access their files. Good. And our second one, the ultimate thing of any network, as soon as you put something on the network or on the cloud, it becomes vulnerable to hackers. This puts the data at risk and their reputation, and is out of their control. Good. Part D. Figure 2 lists some of the actions that may take place in the law company's office. Tick 1 box in each row to show which legislation applies to each action. So we've got 3 laws here: the Data Protection Act, Computer Misuse Act, and Copyright Designs and Patent Act. Let's just quickly recap them. So the Data Protection Act, that's all about data, how it's gathered, how it's stored, its security, and how it's used. Computer Misuse Act is about using computers for unauthorized access to data, so that's without permission. And then you've got the Copyright Designs and Patents Act, which talks about any kind of media, intellectual property. So it could be an idea, it could be images, videos, films, books. And basically, if you didn't create it, you can't share it, you can't copy it, you can't use it without permission of the creator. So the first one, using a picture for the law company's new logo without the original creator's permission. So it's about permission, it's about images. That's going to be Copyright Designs and Patents Act. A secretary acts in a lawyer's personal email without permission. Without permission, that's going to be unauthorized access, so that's the Computer Misuse Act. Making a copy of the latest Hollywood blockbuster movie and sharing it with a client. So it's about movies, it's about copying and sharing. That's all going to be Copyright Designs and Patents Act. Storing customer data insecurely. Well, that's quite an obvious one. It's Data Protection Act. A lawyer installing a keylogger on the secretary's computer. So a keylogger, that gathers information about people, and it's basically hacking into their data. But it's not Data Protection Act because you're installing it, you're using it in an inappropriate way. So that would be the Computer Misuse Act. And then the last one is selling clients' personal legal data to a marketing company without their permission. So it's basically selling data. That's talking about how we use data. So that's going to be the Data Protection Act. Done. Question 11. People often want to buy the most up-to-date smartphone, even though the smartphone they own still works. Discuss the impact of people wanting to upgrade to the latest smartphone. In your answer, you might consider the impact on smartphone users, cultural issues, ethical issues, and environmental issues. So what we need to do is we need to make sure we cover all of these, because in the mark scheme it always says that they've covered a range of issues or a range of topics. So let's start with smartphone users, and one of the things that we could cover is the actual cost, okay, financial. Okay, and when we're talking about that, we could say actually people are spending more money, in some cases more than they have. Another issue could be, for smartphone users, could be, well, let's go to cultural issues. So we could talk about the fact that people need it to be able to fit in with their peers. Okay, we could also talk about to be able to communicate. So for example, if you've got the wrong type of phone, you wouldn't necessarily be able to access to be able to communicate with your friends. So if you don't have one, if you've got an old Nokia, you wouldn't be able to use Snapchat to talk to your friends, or iMessenger. Environmental issues, so we could talk about the disposal. E-waste, and the fact that they're non-biodegradable. And landfill. What else have we got to cover? We've done ethical issues. So under ethical issues, so that's basically, is it right or wrong? So we could talk about is it right for companies to do? Let's do it under ethical. Okay, so let's start to write it up. So we say for smartphone users, I'm going to leave that heading on there. An issue could be the financial or finance. Smartphones are very expensive and can be very expensive, and not everyone can afford them. This can result in people purchasing a phone that they cannot afford just to fit in with their peers. So let's just get rid of that heading on there. So I've covered those points. Now what you have to make sure you do with all of these questions is you have to give relevant examples to back it up. So you could talk about, for example, a teenager may want the newest iPhone so that they can fit in at school. Okay. However, their parents may not be able to afford it. They could take out a contract that they cannot afford to pay in the long term. Okay, so we've covered smartphone users there. So we've spoken, we could say that socially this is necessary potentially so that they could fit in. Okay, and we'll get to that a bit. Oh, so I've done that on the wrong line. Let's write that up here. Okay, we started moving on to, we could say this is a cultural issue. because as more communication takes place over apps, you need to be able to use those apps to communicate with peers. People who can't use those apps are left out. And then again, we need to give an example to back it up. For example, if you have an old, so let's say Nokia phone, you're not really supposed to mention brands, but you could just say an old phone. I'm just doing this so that you understand it better. And your friends all use Snapchat, you will not be able to communicate with them and be left out of potentially key conversations. Okay, cultural, we can move on to now. So we've spoken about fitting in. Maybe we could just reiterate that, and we've done that about. Okay, we wrote about the teenagers buying the phones, didn't we? Oh, so I've written that in the wrong section. So this should have been at the top, shouldn't it? So I should have done this up here. There we go. And I've got that bit which I've already written about them fitting in. Okay, good. So environmental. Next. So we can say as more smartphones are developed and disposed of, this creates more waste. Phones are non-biodegradable and result in landfill. Okay, this is harmful to the environment. Let's just be quite explicit. We could also talk about the fact that they contain carcinogenics, so poisons, which can leak into the environment. Okay, and we could just reiterate the fact that part of the problem is that when people don't use their phone, they get a new phone, they throw the old one away. Okay, good. And then we've got ethical. So by now I'd be going on to my next page. We could do the ethical question of, is it right for people and is it right for companies to create these create so many phones? Right for to produce and encourage others to buy them like this because of all the damage mass production can cause. So I know you can't really see that last paragraph there, so what I'll do is I'll just lift it up a bit more so it's a bit clearer and easier for you to read. Okay, so the ethical question is whether it is right for phone companies to produce phones and encourage others to buy them because of all the damage mass production can cause. And that's how you go about answering that question.